Hi, I'm Nick CUDE, and I'm here to present to you 10 answers to. So starting off with con A2s, my opponents said that bases ruin U.S. legitimacy, extend our impact from the second contention, maintaining presence on the island shows the world the good side of the military and improves U.S. legitimacy. An Okinawan citizen even commented, when I see them working hard at the airport every day, I'm really thankful they are working really hard, and I never imagined the U.S. could help us so much. NBC News reports that the Japanese public is very pro-America and generally sees the military presence as a benefit, and furthermore, U.S. crimes in Okinawa have declined significantly. Hope notes that strict new liberty and alcohol rules coincided with a historic drop in crimes last year committed by U.S. personnel in Okinawa, according to the statistics released this week by military and Japan government. Crimes committed outside base gates by the 47,000 status of forces visa holders on the island decreased to 32 total offenses from 2013, an average of 56 per year over the previous 10 years. It was the lowest number since Okinawa reverted back to Japanese control in 72. And their next argument that sexual assault is happening because of military bases. The probe presents only one instance of sexual assault, and that was back in the 1980s. And while that does not make it justified, it shows that there's not enough empirical evidence to prove that bases have actually had a major sexual assault impact. The impacts that we prove significantly outweigh the impacts of sexual harm, and because ours have been proven numerous times, they've been repeated, and they can't prove more than one instance. They also say that the bases have environmental impacts, but military bases, yes, they've had impacts on the environment in the past, but steps are currently being taken to combat that. Japan Times states that Japan and the United States on Monday signed a new pact allowing local officials to enter into U.S. military bases in Japan to conduct environmental surveys. Under the record, the U.S. can only also give permission for Japan to conduct soil and other relevant surveys about 7 times prior to the extended return to Japanese control of land used for U.S. bases. Additionally, the U.S. has complied by returning much of the land to Okinawans who will better protect the environment. Regardless, our impacts of dehumanization and war outweigh. On their argument of opportunity for Japanese remilitarization, while they say this is good, Brett Morris of Counterpunch states that the territorial dispute between the two countries over a group of islands in the East China Sea, referred to as the Senkaku, carries the potential for conflict. However, precisely what is not needed is the increased militarization from either side. Japan's new security laws make a more hostile environment in which both China and Japan will now have to navigate, heightening distrust and creating a more dangerous climate. And so Japan's militarization will actually send a signal to China that they're ready to take action, and it will launch a full-scale war, and the U.S. would not be in the region to deter any conflict if bases were moved as they propose. And this militarization would destroy the region completely. On their argument that deterrence will be that bases will deter war with China and the threats of North Korea, the Nation News reports that it is also questionable whether such bases actually increase the security of host nations. The presence of U.S. bases can turn a country into an explicit target for foreign power or militants. Rather than stabilizing dangerous regions, foreign bases frequently heighten military tensions and discourage diplomatic solutions to conflicts. Placing U.S. bases near the borders of countries like China, Russia, and Iran increase threats to their security and encourages them to respond by boosting their own military spending and activity, leading to base race. U.S. presence actually encourages China and North Korea attack on Okinawa, which guarantees a war and undermines the human rights violations the probe presents. A2 Abenomics. Abe is growing as a political capital continuously by keeping base presence in Okinawa. The U.S. stands behind Abe and supports his efforts. The Asahi Shimbun stated that Kennedy responded that the presence of the U.S. military in Okinawa is the cornerstone of peace and stability in East Asia, and reiterated the unwavering commitment of the U.S. and Japanese governments to the construction of a new airfield in Honoko. So this is clearly boosting Abe's political capital and is helping him in international relations significantly, which will help Japan in the long run. On their argument that we can have presence in other locations, that we should relocate bases, no, Okinawa is key. NBC News says that the NBC News says that about 50,000 U.S. troops are stationed throughout Japan under a mutually secure security treaty signed in the 1960s. And Tokyo supports the alliance because it saves Japan money on defense, blah, blah, blah. Basically, what we're saying is, hold on, the opposition to the base. And so it's strategically important. There is no place like Okinawa that can actually access the impacts that Okinawa does. It can access other areas and has prevented war because of its strategic importance in the region. And additionally, the Japanese public is very pro-America and generally sees a military presence as a benefit from NBC News. On to pro A2s. Answer to humanitarian aid, other actors actually solve. And so the U.S. is not key to humanitarian aid in Okinawa. There are many other actors. A Foreign Policy Institute states that units from the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force are not necessarily essential to humanitarian operations. The Japanese Coast Guard and the Maritime Self-Defense Force have also been heavily involved in humanitarian missions. And just beyond JSDF, almost 100 countries and multiple NGOs have helped in times of disaster. In response to a recent tsunami, Matador News reports that 90 other countries and 6 organizations have offered donations, rescue teams, and other support to victims of the earthquakes and tsunami. On their argument, on the Khan's argument that they present humanitarian aid, and that's changing the face of the U.S. military, and that's undermining all these impacts that we present. Actually, humanitarian aid is just disaster militarism, and that sucks. It exploits the suffering of victims, and it's only used for justification of military bases, and it's expensive and counter-effective. Yoshiyuki Uehara said that I hope we stop glorifying Operation Tomodachi. Our gratitude for U.S. military assistance after the earthquake and tsunami and U.S. military-based problems are separate issues. The U.S. government used the rhetoric of disaster militarism to justify Japan's dependence on U.S. military forces and the high concentration of U.S. bases in Okinawa. And this is a clear political exploitation of the earthquake disaster. And Washington has done this several times in the Philippines and so on. The many contradictions exist in this concept of disaster militarism. PIF points out that the conflation of military power and disaster relief is highly problematic and cost-effective. It's not efficient or transparent. Military operations exhaust limited budgets for humanitarian assistance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction activities. Confusion about the military's role as soldiers or relief providers can lead to suspicion and fear, and some people may not be able to even access relief as a result. According to the Department of Defense, the Japan Pacific Command does not only offer aid to countries in the region dealing with disasters, but also forms of advice and assistance. But more troops on the ground offer greater opportunities for such gatherings of intelligence. Revelations that a CIA-funded fake vaccination program in Pakistan was used to find and kill Osama bin Laden might be another example of commingling humanitarian relief and military operations, rightly contributing to civilian confusion, public distress, and questions of transparency and accountability. It does not even address the underlying causes for the increasing number of intense storms. It just solves after the storms happen, and it doesn't adequately prepare Okinawa or any region for the disasters at hand and take steps to prevent those in the future. So this is clearly a very negative impact that bases have on humanitarian aid, and it's simply exploiting the region. And the answer to deterrence, we should prefer soft power over hard power. They say that we can deter, but the fact that bases are on Okinawa shows North Korea and China that we are only there to be militarily involved. However, this is countereffective and harmful. The Cato Institute states that Washington should not be plotting new wars. Instead, the U.S. should act more as an offshore balancer, and that Washington should leave day-to-day defense responsibilities to friendly Asian states, most notably Japan, and pull its forces back to America because there's no longer any need for permanent U.S. garrisons in the region. We must maintain and practice soft power rather than assert hard power, especially in this region, and we want to show China that we're acting friendly so that we can gain relations and stop war altogether.